Hello everyone, I'm Clay Jenkinson. I'm a staff member here at Bismarck State College, and we are conducting what we call the Dakota Interviews. Interviews with a number of interesting and remarkable North Dakotans. This is the first of those interviews with Mayor Dennis Johnson of Dickinson, North Dakota. There will be many in this series, and this one is being recorded in September of 2014 in the second phase of the great Bakken Oil Boom. Welcome, Dennis Johnson.
Thank you.
There was a pretty widespread sense that western North Dakota was depopulating, that young people were leaving and probably not coming back. How often do you think, wow, when I started this, here I was trying to keep the city alive, and now I'm managing explosive growth?
Just shows you how things can change quickly.
But you must think about this.
Well, I don't reflect that much on the past because the present is so busy, and because the present is so busy, you really do have to plan for the future. I think of this Bakken as a black swan event.
What do you mean?
Well, I think a black swan occurs once every, 10,000 swans or whatever it is. It's an event that occurs seldomly. If you're a mathematician, you think of the normal curve and you get out there on the tail end of the normal curve. A black swan is a tail end event. It just rarely happens, so if you're a planner, you're not planning for those kinds of things. You're planning for the things that are likely to occur. So this is a black swan event, and it's one of those things that initially you certainly can't plan for and anticipate. I mean, in the year 2000, we weren't campaigning and saying, the Bakken is
Something's coming here, folks.
Yeah, coming, and we're going to go from 16,000 people to 25 or 30,000 people in a 5-year period of time. That would have sounded pretty foolish in 2000.
What did the city look like when you were elected?
Well, let me start by saying that the environment was quite a bit different than the environment of today. In the year 2000, the issue essentially, the core issue in my view, was Dickinson had been 16,000 people for I think 3 consecutive census, 1980, 1990, the year 2000, 16,000 people. So the essential question was, are we 16,000 people on our way to 15,000, or are we 16,000 people on our way to 17,000 people? And to the community, which do you want to be? Because I don't think you're going to remain 16,000 indefinitely, even though we'd had 30 years of that. And so most of our communities were, when it came to schools, we weren't thinking about building new schools. We were thinking about how are we going to utilize our excess classroom space because of the declining enrollments. And now today, of course, it's so very different because all these communities in the Bakken, be they the larger communities or the smaller communities, are facing tremendous population growth and tremendous growth in their classrooms. And I don't know how many different bond issues in the last year or so have been voted on in Bakken communities, but there have been several because they've had to shift gears and go from thinking about how do we deal with declining population to not only how do we deal with growth, but very rapid, explosive growth. What do we need to do to make Dickinson a community where people want to live? Because I didn't think we were going to grow economically by chasing smokestacks. I thought we would grow economically by entrepreneurs establishing a business and growing it. Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you can live anywhere. I mean, the world is really your choice. And so how could we keep our local entrepreneurs and maybe even attract entrepreneurs who weren't local, that they would want to live in Dickinson? So we said, that's how we start out. How do we improve the quality of place in a community? And the very first big thing that we went after was we said, you know, when you live in the northern Great Plains, the weather isn't always the best. Even during the summer months, it can be rainy, it can be windy, it can even be cold. But so to us, we said recreation's important to people. You live in the northern Great Plains, indoor recreation makes a lot of sense. So really the first major issue after I was elected was to campaign for an additional half-cent sales tax so we could finance an indoor recreation facility, which we did. I think people pretty well know about our West River Community Center that opened in May of 2004.
But not everyone thought that was a good idea.
57% did.
But you remember some of the naysayers and the doom and gloom. And all of my life growing up in Dickinson, people said, we need a concert center, we need a dome, we need a civic center. And each of those was floated and somehow never quite came to pass.
And that's true. I mean, the vote passed 57 to 43, but 43% is still a lot of people.
That's almost half.
Yes, that opposed it. That's a significant number. So I'm going to fast forward to after the building is open and been functioning for a couple of years. Former Governor Schaefer came to town, and when I was talking to him, I said, Governor, have you seen the West River Community Center? He said, I haven't. Him and Nancy showed up, and we took them through and spent about a half hour in the building. And just as we were leaving the building, we were literally, you know, hitting the door, and a little older lady, about a half foot shorter than me, all of a sudden popped in between the governor and myself, and she linked her arms into our arms, and she said to Governor Ed, she says, Governor, how'd you like the building? What'd you think? And he went on to say that he loved it, and he had several, you know, pleasing adjectives about the building. And she says, we love it too. And then she looked up at me and said, and Mayor, to think I voted against it. And I looked at her and I said, well, how would you vote today? And she said, I would vote for it.
Of your concerns, and I know you have lots of them, how large are environmental concerns? You know, in other parts of the country, there's an intense debate about fracking and the water and the chemicals and what it does to our aquifers and possibilities of earthquakes and so on. You hear this all the time. In your own thinking, and I know you're not an oil engineer, but in your own thinking, how serious a factor do you think the environmental one is?
I kind of split the environmental concerns into two general areas in my thinking. One is the concerns below the surface and then above the surface. As you said, I am not an expert on this. I'm more concerned about what's happening, say, on the surface or just a few feet below the surface. I'm not really concerned about what's going on 10,000 feet below the surface. I'm concerned with what's happening on top of the surface, not only with, say, the energy development itself, but what we do in terms of buildings that we build, where we put them, what our building requirements are, things of that nature. I don't think as a state we have a good overall plan on what we want western North Dakota to look like 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Who should be doing that?
Well, you know, I think you have to look to your state leaders there, to the legislature, and of course to the governor's office. That, you know, they would be the ones that would have to articulate the vision for not only all of North Dakota, but western North Dakota, and put the policies and actions in place to achieve that vision. See, I think the state should have a comprehensive plan for the whole Bakken, and we don't. I mean, if we're going to count on the local political subdivisions, the cities and the counties to piecemeal a plan, each that they think works for them, I'm not so sure that's the best way to go.
It's another thing to make it come to pass. Are you willing to do the hard, unpleasant work of, I suppose, lobbying, but talking to the people who matter so that they will consider adopting such a comprehensive plan?
I think that's what we need to do is in between sessions have a blue ribbon group with a blue ribbon consultant to say, with the mission of let's develop a comprehensive plan for western North Dakota, for this Bakken. And really, you know, the legislature's got to put that together. It's a large interim committee is really what it is.
Do you have supporters?
I think there would be a lot of support for it, especially those of us in government, local government in the West.
Do you think this will happen?
Oh, I'm doubtful.
Because?
Well, you know, we seem to be okay with kind of going from legislative session to legislative session and reacting to, you know, I guess what the issues of the day are.
How important is this to you? I mean, obviously North Dakota is kind of scrambling and it's doing a pretty good job of handling all this. We'll probably get by if we don't do something that overarching. How serious is this idea? Is this critical?
If it's critical that a community the size of Dickinson plan, I think it's critical that the state plan, especially, again, for the Bakken area.
But I hope you hear the intention of my question. It's not happening. You speaking of this. I haven't heard the governor speak of this. I haven't heard the Senate Majority Leader or the House Leader say this. I haven't heard a legislative committee examine this. You're speaking pretty much alone in this way at the moment.
Maybe it's a bad idea.
Maybe it's a great idea.
Well, I think I don't know if it's a great idea, but I think it's the right thing to do, you know, this development, what's taking place again, is so extraordinary that I think it requires a vision, extensive planning, and tremendous financial investment, massive financial investment.
If the governor called you and said, Mayor Johnson, I want you to put together a proposal, 5-10 pages of what this would look like, and there'll be plenty of money, and we'll staff it, and we'll get the great consultants who know this sort of thing. What would you want, sort of give us some points, what would you want this blue ribbon panel to do?
Well, again, I think its overall mission would be to say, develop a vision of what it is we want western North Dakota to become, and a strategy on an overall strategy on attaining that vision. And then once you have that, then you can get into specific tactics on what you're going to do to implement that strategy. And I would see it having quite a cross section of North Dakotans on it, maybe some industry people from outside of North Dakota even, but and you would do this in between legislative sessions. You can't do this in a legislative session. The time is too short. There's too many other issues to deal with. This is too important to not take the amount of reflective time and study the issue and come up with good plans.
So name some things some questions that this commission would look at.
What can we do to add value to these resources and other than just extract them? Now, we already have some examples of that taking place. You know, the refinery that's being built in Dickinson. We just had an announcement the other day of the fertilizer plant in Spiritwood. Those two are great examples of value add. That's got to be a core part of the strategy is what can we do to enact policies that would promote value add, whether these value-added facilities are located in the Bakken or eastern North Dakota or wherever they might be. That would be one example. I think another example in terms is physically, what do we want us to look like? Do we want us to look like we have dirty, muddy roads when it's wet and dirty, dusty roads when it's dry? I don't think so. So what can you do to prevent that from happening? Do you want communities that look like they're planned and orderly, or do you want communities that look like they've been overrun? Do we want more indoor recreational facilities? Things like that.
Do you think that the communities that are most impacted, so say Williston, Watford City, Tioga, Dickinson, would be willing to cooperate in that way? Because as I look at it from the outside, I see very different zoning protocols in these places, some with what I would regard as a cautious, thoughtful plan like Dickinson, and then other places that have a much looser concept of growth, and then places that have actually decided not to have a zoning plan at all.
Well, I think they would cooperate. There's a new phrase that I've been hearing in the last few weeks, and I've been using myself. It's Bakken fatigue. Those of us who live in the Bakken, those of us who work in the Bakken, I think are, to one degree or another, are experiencing Bakken fatigue. I mean, there's so much hustle and bustle, and you just take traffic. I mean, there's a lot more traffic. Plus, when you're in the traffic now, you see more examples of bad driving, rude driving, and you just get tired of it. You get fatigued, Bakken fatigue. So my sense is there's, if you could measure Bakken fatigue, it's on the rise. And so I think people would be ready for, say, a more formal approach. Now, I grew up in a small community. It isn't that they don't want more orderly development. They don't have the staff. A small community isn't going to have a professional engineer on staff, a professional planner. They many times don't have building inspectors. What do they need building inspectors for? I mean, there weren't hardly any buildings being built. They probably, if they had zoning ordinances, they probably didn't have a zoning board and so on and so forth. They didn't have and likely don't have today some of the human resources that you need to manage growth, to do it in an orderly way. And see, that's where if you have a plan, if that's one of the issues, if you've got small communities saying, we don't have planners, we don't have engineers, well, maybe that's where the state can step in and say, we'll provide the planners, we'll provide the engineering services. We can provide you with the model ordinances that you need to control and manage your development.
If you really did honestly assess what you've done, how important, what would you say your achievement has been in the last 14 years, you personally?
I'll just say this, leadership matters. It matters if it's an appointed leader or an elected leader. Leadership matters in any organization, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector. And the other thing, there's always been, as long as I can remember, a sense of community pride in what we look like, what we physically look like. Even before the Bakken, we would hear comments from travelers, visitors who say, your city looks so clean. People take a lot of pride in what their homes and yards look like.
Why would you give the better part of 2 decades to this and not think, man, I am good. I've done some really important things here?
It was an opportunity to make a difference. And how many of us get to really say that in life, that I had an opportunity to make a difference and maybe actually realized that opportunity and did make a difference. I hope 20 years from now, young people will look at our community and say, somebody did something right here a few years ago. They may not know who that somebody is, but I hope that they'll be able to say that about Dickinson.
But you speak a lot, and you have a reputation for being an unusually thoughtful public speaker. That it's sort of a little not what people might expect, but there's some sober quality to your talk. It's not just boosterism. There's people say, wow, I mean, this is an unusual sort of leader, especially at a time like this when you could easily be one of those bombastic types.
I was trained as an engineer, so if I'm going to give a speech, it's generally not off the cuff. It's prepared. And so I get invited to many things, and many times the invitation goes like this: oh, we'd like you to show up and speak for 10 minutes. And the thought in the back of my mind, for me to speak for 10 minutes, I have to prepare for 3 hours. That's just the way I do it. So it might, I guess the remarks in that sense are a little more thoughtful then and more structured.
But you don't always tell people what they want to hear.
I try to speak my views, I think you can deliver, say, bad news or disagree with someone else's point of view, but you don't have to do it in a threatening, adversarial way. I mean, you can, in my job, both on the business side and mayor side, many times I have to deliver bad news. You didn't get the job, or I'm not going to vote your way on this. But you can still, I think, deliver bad news in a compassionate and caring manner. At least that's what I try to do.
But a lot of these people who are headquartered in Tulsa or Houston or wherever, this is not their first rodeo, and they come and they think, well, you got to deal with the local people, and you deal with the mayor, and you deal with the city commission and the county commission, and there's a fair amount of swagger that they are powerful, rich, going to do great things for your community. But you don't find that phenomenon too much in your personal communications with them.
It's not my first rodeo either. I'm 65 years old. I've had some difficult experiences in my life. I've had some good professional experiences. I mean, I've had experiences, so when executives from a large development company or an oil company come to visit me, it's more on equal terms. I lost my boss, the founder of TMI, in 1984 in an airplane accident. I had to make the telephone call to his family home and say he was gone. I lost my son to cancer 12 years ago. I held his hand when he passed away.
How old was he?
He's 26. I don't think I'll be asked to do anything more difficult than that. So if it's a difficult phone call to make or a difficult meeting to hold, I can always say, I've been involved in something a whole lot more difficult. I can make this call, or I can do this meeting, or I can deliver this bad news. So when I deal with people from the business community, the energy community, or other government officials, I kind of draw on those past experiences to cope with whatever the situation is that I'm dealing with.
A lot of people are saying now that one of the greatest benefits of the boom is that people who would have departed are either coming back or now they can stay in western North Dakota, that we have enough for them now. We have jobs, we have a cash flow, we have opportunity, we have amenities that we didn't previously have. How much of that do you see?
A lot. I mean, what you said, I think I agree with. I would say it's very true. We are getting young people here, young families. Some of them are coming back. They have North Dakota roots. But others, they're just looking for economic opportunity. Where they came from, there was no economic opportunity. Now, I heard the other day, if you're a skilled welder and maybe a specialty welder, you can work in the oil fields and have an income approaching $200,000. I talked to a young person who works on the rigs up in the Keene area, and he said, my job in the Bakken, and he's from Wyoming, he says, my job in the Bakken pays $23 an hour. The same job on a Wyoming rig pays $17 an hour, and on a Texas rig pays $13 an hour. So the young people are coming because they have an opportunity, an economic opportunity to better themselves and their families.
So is Dickinson a more interesting community because of this growth?
Well, that's a yes or no question, yes. I think so.
I see African Americans in Dickinson, I see Hispanics in Dickinson, I see Asians in Dickinson, I see people who are clearly not Great Plains people. There's a lot of diversity now, maybe more than ever before.
Oh, no question about it. I forget which of the Catholic churches in Dickinson, but one of them several months ago established Mass in Spanish. And when I talk with the school administrators, we're dealing with a lot more students where, English is their second language. It's not their primary language. And, issues we didn't deal with before.
Now, I'm from Dickinson, and I know the character of the town pretty well. Not everybody likes all of this. There are some people who like old, homogeneous Dickinson with its Germans and Bohemians, and they're a little uncomfortable with this diversity and with the new energy of people that are not quite of the same mold of our history. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't disagree with you, but I think those that feel that way are coping with it. And, we don't see those kinds of feelings spilling out into, say, violence or discrimination that I'm aware of.
So I hear this all the time, Dennis. That Dickinson is the class act of the boom, and Williston, and people say, well, at least it's not Williston. And Williston gets the rap of being an example of not very careful development. Is that a fair assessment of the difference of the two communities?
Well, I think before you make any fair assessments of the communities, we have to remember that the oil boom really started up there and happened very fast. And again, they're in one of the major oil producing counties. They're adjacent to the other two of the other major oil-producing counties. So there's a lot of intensity there, and it happened very fast. So I'm sure they have things that they look at now and say, I wish we'd had more time, we could have done this a little differently. So I'm not going to be critical of what's happened there.
$1 million barrels, maybe 2 million barrels. What's Dickinson going to look like in 2020 and 2030? What are your best figures for population and so on?
Well, we think today we're at least 25,000, I'll call them
at
permanent.
the moment,
Permanent residents. It could be as high as 30. And then you've got, of course, a group of people that aren't really permanent, whether they're construction workers or related to the oil industry that are in the community. I think by 2020, 2022, Dickinson could have 42,000 permanent residents that, we could grow 1,500 to 2,000 people a year over the next several years.
That's 3 times the population of when you became mayor.
Yeah, if it gets to be that, 2.5, 3
If
times.
if you could control it, what would be the pace of the growth? Would it be 1,500 to 2,000 a year or smaller?
Well, if we could control it, I think we'd like to see it be smaller. I mean, if you have 1 or 2% growth per year, that's pretty good growth. It would be easier to manage and plan for.
Does any part of you feel a sense of loss? Not personally, but as a North Dakotan. Dickinson was a certain type of town. Now it's going to be a small city. It had a certain type of character. It's going to be a different character, some continuity and some differences. Does any of you feel ever a pang of loss for the Dickinson that will now be absorbed by something bigger, better?
Oh, sure. We haven't talked about this, but in the Bakken communities, and Dickinson is no different, but there's the crowding out effect. We talked about Bakken fatigue. Well, the crowding out effect is oil's a big gorilla in the room. It's become a huge percentage of our economy, and it crowds out others. It crowds out our elderly. It crowds out businesses that may be there that really have no connection to, say, the energy industry, and perhaps businesses whose markets were elsewhere. So you have the crowding out effect. There's a sense of loss, really as a result of that.
And people on fixed incomes and so on. Elderly people who can't take the pressures.
Our hospital people will tell you that they see evidence of that the elderly population as a percentage of the overall population has declined, where the younger population has increased. In my business, in the last 2 or 3 years, I won't say every retiree, but the large majority of the retirees retire, sell their homes. They can get more money than they ever dreamt home, and they move to where 1 or 2 or more of their adult children are, whether it's move to Bismarck, Fargo. I've had them go to Las Vegas. I've got 2 or 3 in Minnesota, but they move, and they can buy a home, more home than what they sold in the Dickinson area for the same amount of money, and be close to their adult children. It's, in a sense, they're crowded out.
Cashing out, crowding
Right.
out.
Yeah, cashing out.
But they might have done that anyway.
They may have. I think they're more apt to do it in this environment than in the environment that we had in the year 2000.
Do you think that the leadership of North Dakota is laying the table, is setting the table for that kind of long-term value-added processing growth?
I see more evidence of them doing that today than, when the boom first hit. And again, when the boom first hit, boy, there's a lot of things you just got to deal with right today, and we'll worry about tomorrow later. But again, now I see we have an opportunity to be more concerned about not just what's on my plate today, but what'll be on the plate of whoever follows me 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So I think we are seeing more evidence of our leadership being proactive.
A lot of people in the Bakken zone have been frustrated with the state legislature and the governor and so on because they feel that the needs are gigantic and the state has been less than fully generous in supplying the cash to meet those needs. Where are you on this question?
Well, I would say it this way, whether it was intended or unintended, and I believe it was unintended, the de facto policy of the state is, and I'm going to put this in financial terms, business terms, policy of the state is to delever the state balance sheet and for the political subdivisions in the Bakken to lever up their balance sheet. So when this started, Dickinson essentially had zero debt. By the time the legislature goes into session in January, we'll have $100 million in debt. And of course they have no debt, and their reserve funds are running over. Their general fund ending balance will be much higher than they originally projected. And like I said, I'm not so sure that was their intended policy, but to date, that has been the policy, de facto policy of the state. They delever their balance sheet, we lever up ours. The governor has spent a lot of time in the Bakken, and I think he is really now at the point where he is really at the top of his game. He's knowledgeable about our needs. We meet with him on a regular basis. So I'm feeling we're much better positioned than we were 2 years ago and 4 years ago. So I'm optimistic.
There's been some talk about all of this to the effect that the state government is much more willing to spend money on gross infrastructure in the Bakken than it is on things that could be thought by some to be frivolous or luxury items. But your big interest is curb appeal, that Dickinson has to be a great community, not just an efficient community. Do you think that there is enough attention to quality of life in the legislature?
Well, I think there could be more attention to that. That really is an important component, that if you're going to have sustainability, again, people have to want to live in your community. They have to want to live in Williston and want to live in Dickinson and Tioga and Watford City and Stanley and Newtown. People have to want to live in these places. You can't put all your money into sewer lines and water tanks. I mean, you have to give them a reason for wanting to live there.
What keeps you up at night?
The issue I worry most about is money. Not my money, money for the city. because I'm not willing, nor do I believe my fellow commissioners are, nor do I believe the city administration is, we're not willing to take on any more debt. Actually, we want to reduce the debt level. And that's what I worry about, because as a city, you know, I can't say to our citizens, Clay, you get to flush your toilets on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and your neighbor gets, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday. We have to take away the wastewater. We have to deliver water to our residents. We have to do these things. They're not optional. Now, we can make you drive on a dirt road as opposed to a paved road. But when it comes to the wastewater and water, we have to take it away. We have to treat it responsibly. We have to deliver water to you. We have to have the funds to do that, or we just say there's no more development.
North Dakota from 1889 until around 1989 was an agrarian place. It was one of the principal farm family states in the Union. We at one time had more communities under 2,500 than any other state per capita. We had over 80,000 farms at one time. We were an agricultural state. That sort of began to play itself out in the 1980s and 90s. We're still a very important state in agribusiness. But the economy is now diversified, and the Bakken Oil Boom, which is the third boom in the series and the big one, has really changed the identity of the state. And now when you go west of Minot or west of Dickinson, you see an increasingly industrialized landscape. That's quite a change.
Yes, I mean, it's a big change. I think the economy of the 70s and 80s wasn't sustainable, and you know, we saw that playing out, that North Dakota, to survive economically, had to diversify its economy away from just production agriculture. And I'm not an expert on agriculture, but I would believe that the agricultural community of the 80s is very different from the present one today. You use the term agribusiness. I would think that we've seen agribusiness replace much of what we used to consider the family farm. Not that there aren't still families there, but it's a bigger business. I think they farm more acres. They farm it with very sophisticated pieces of equipment and other technology. So I'm sure they've seen big changes in the last 20, 30 years there.
Former North Dakota Governor Ed Schaefer played a significant role in creating the business climate, which is now flourishing in North Dakota. When he came to the governorship, he said the state is open for business. We're going to make sure that it's a business-friendly place. And he worked hard at that, and the legislature cooperated, and now we're seeing the benefits of that. He also said recently, this is not just an oil boom, it's a technology revolution. The technologies are now beginning to fall into place that are going to make places like western North Dakota resource-rich environments. And it may not just be oil and coal and natural gas. The technologies are changing so fast now that the future appears to be extremely bright for western North Dakota.
It looks that way to me. I think what Governor Schaefer said is a very profound and likely very accurate. It's hard not to be optimistic.
So what are you going to do when you retire?
I really don't plan to retire. I mean, I guess people I admire are like, say, a Warren Buffett, who is on the other side of 80 and goes to work every day and is current and involved. And be okay with me if I'm fortunate enough to get on the other side of 80 to go into work.
To keep your health and energy levels. I wanted to talk to you for a short time about conservation. You love the Badlands. You've spoken several times about their beauty. You also were the chair of the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation. The Badlands are a really extraordinary resource. Do you worry at all that the industrialization of western North Dakota will create impacts that will lessen the extraordinary appeal of those landscapes?
I do. I mean, I think we can develop and still don't have to degrade or intrude on these areas. Even if the technology isn't available right today, say, to not intrude, I suspect 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the technology will change and then some of these areas can be developed and not be harmed. But we talked, for example, about the corridors in and out of the Badlands. It's trying to develop in a way that you keep those corridors attractive. And you can do that. You don't have to just do it by not developing. You can develop in a responsible manner that maintains, your appearance.
Do you think there is the will in the larger population of North Dakota to make those insistences?
Well, I don't know how often the larger population in North Dakota comes and travels the Bakken. The Bakken is largely, in my view, a north-south phenomena play. That, if you drive from Berthold, North Dakota on Highway 2 to Grand Forks, or from Richardson, North Dakota on I-94 to Fargo, North Dakota looks pretty much the same to me as it did 40 years ago. Yes, Bismarck's got more people in it, Devil's Lake's got more water, but I mean, it looks pretty much the same. But if you drive north and south on Highway 22 or Highway 85, it doesn't look the same. It doesn't look the same as it did 5 or 6 years ago. You can really see the changes. I'm not so sure the greater population drives north and south on those highways. They may drive east and west on Highway 2 and I-94 and may cross the Bakken. But I mean on Highway 94 from Richardson to Beach, outside of a small stretch, you don't see a lot of the Bakken.
It's pretty clean.
It's pretty clean.
So go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say you'll see a little more on Highway 2 from Berthold to Williston. But
are we doing enough, do you think, to conserve the special places? As you know, there's been a pretty serious debate in North Dakota about how much is enough. Should we spare something? Should we have special protocols so that the corporations have to tiptoe around some very beautiful places? Do you think we're doing enough?
Well, it's really hard for me to assess that. This maybe sound like a cliche, but I don't think you can do too much. I mean, if you're going to make a mistake, wouldn't you rather make the mistake of doing too much than too little? Because if you're doing too much, you can always later on come to that conclusion and back off. But if you do too little, it's really hard to undo what's been done. So if you're going to make a mistake, do too much.
You're saying err on the side of protection.
Protection. Mm-hmm.
As you think about your life, you're 65 years old now. Can you give me a short autobiographical statement that sort of explains how you became who you are? You could have been a pro golfer. You could have been an insurance salesman. You could have gravitated to New York City. You could have done anything, but you chose this life. How did it fall out that you followed this path?
Well, if you've seen me swing a golf club, you've known I couldn't be a pro golfer. When I was in college, I discovered I had a strong interest in business, and so I went where I thought I could learn the most about business, and I thought where I would learn the most about business is a small business, and that because you would do a little bit of everything. And so that's when I joined TMI. I was 5 years old and less than 100 people, and and I thought I would be there for a couple of years, and then I would go on to something bigger and better. So I suppose, in a sense, part of my career has, I wouldn't call it an accident, but I mean, you can never really chart the future out. I got there, discovered that I liked what I was doing. I liked the people I was with. I had only been to Dickinson once in my life prior to going out there to interview for a job, and discovered I really loved the Dickinson community. I mean, I'm Scandinavian and Lutheran, and I thought everybody in North Dakota was Scandinavian and Lutheran, and when I got to Dickinson, I found out just the opposite, that where I grew up, it'd be page after page of Johnson's in the phone book. Here was, like 4 names. One of my early experiences in Dickinson, I was standing in line for something, and the guy ahead of me gave his name, and it was Cincinnati. And he walked through. When I got there, I gave my name and said Johnson, and they asked me how to spell it.
Really?
Yes. I know.
That's the lucky they've got.
Yeah, this is a different place. This was a fun place. So.
Bohemian, German largely.
Right.
But you've found a social climate there that you like.
Yeah. They're, you go to a Norwegian Lutheran wedding, the last 20 minutes, you go downstairs, have coffee and cake, and you're out of there. You go to a wedding in Dickinson, and especially back in the 70s, it was a lot more than just coffee and cake.
It was more ethnic.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a large Ukrainian community.
Yes. Yeah. So
it's been one of the great things about Western Dakota.
I've really enjoyed my time there.
When did you realize that you had leadership ambitions or capacities?
Probably one of the things you don't know about me was I spent 6 years in college, and I spent 6 summers on what was called an interregional fire crew. I was based out of northern Idaho. It was a Forest Service crew, and we'd fly throughout the United States on forest fires. So in my 6-year career, I've been on over 70 wildfires in every western state except Alaska. And these crews were 25-person crews. They had a crew boss, and we're divided into 3 squads and a squad boss. My second year, I was made a squad boss, and in my 5th and 6th years, I was the crew boss. And I know at the time I was far and away the youngest crew boss of the 7 or 8 crews that they had in that region. I was also studying leadership and management in college at that time. So I would go back for 9 months and read the books, and then spend 3 months in the summer actually practicing this. And it was there that I think I learned that whatever it takes to lead, I seem to have, and it was recognized by others. And I just kind of ended up in those positions. So it seems like whatever groups I'm in, eventually I end up in one of the leadership roles.
So tell me what that means. In every group that I am in,
maybe I shouldn't say.
Oh, but in groups,
say most
right?
groups.
But what is it that you have that people see and want? What are the qualities of a leader in your mind?
Well, okay, I'm the kind of guy that if you got a crowd in the room, I can walk in. Very few people notice I came, and when I leave, very few people notice I'm gone. I'm the kind of guy that if there's a series of 6 hills out there and we need to charge up the right one and take it, I might not be the guy leading the charge, but I know which of the 6 hills we should charge up.
What about, you seem to be a good listener.
Well, I hope so. I'd rather be the person in the background. It's not the most comfortable thing for me, for example, to be interviewed.
Really?
I'd rather, say, send our city administrator out here to be interviewed, and I'll sit and watch.
Why is that? You say you're an introvert.
I am.
But
but I also said that introverts can do everything extroverts do. It's just harder work for us. So today is hard work for me.
there are a handful of leaders who have been called upon for one reason or another to step up at this time and to help get us through this, to survive it, and if possible to thrive. And you happen to be one of the dozen or so people whose job that is. And so leadership matters. And so you've stepped up. I think it's important that we know something about how you think. I think you've provided that. But you find it somewhat uncomfortable.
You know, I've often said it's really hard for me to do cocktail parties, especially if it's a party or a group of strangers that I don't know, to mix and mingle. That's really hard work for me. I'd rather get up and give a speech to the strangers than, you know, do the cocktail party thing.
So at what point, while you're serving as mayor beginning in 2000, do you remember the moment when you realized, oh my goodness, this thing is going huge. This is going to be the biggest thing that I ever had to attend to?
I think it was around 2007, maybe 2008, when I started to realize that the Bakken was a different animal and was going to be a big deal. I think as each succeeding year since has come along, realizing it's an even bigger deal than...
You keep having that experience.
Right, yes. Yeah.
And so last question, if you could do anything, skydive or spend a year in Germany or go to the Antarctic, I mean, are there things you want to do that are sort of crazy things that no one would guess?
No. You know, being an entrepreneur, a business person, you know, you're a risk taker, but I'm not a thrill seeker. So I'll take business risks, but I have no desire to jump out of an airplane or do that kind of thing. I'm also kind of a homebody. You know, I'm okay with being at home. Life is really good for me right now. I'm enjoying very much what I'm doing and who I'm with, and life is good.
I've been talking with Mayor Dennis Johnson, the CEO of TMI Corporation in Dickinson, North Dakota, and for 14 years now, the president of the Dickinson City Commission, one of the extraordinary central figures of the southern branch of the Bakken oil play in western North Dakota. These are the Dakota Interviews. Thanks for joining us. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you next time.